All right, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. A little bit like Karen did earlier, first of all, I'm going to let Hayley introduce herself, and I'll give you a little bit of background on me, and then we're going to get into the detail of what PepsiCo are up to. So, yeah. Hayley?
Nice to see you all. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm Hayley Shore, and I work in the Design and Innovation Center for PepsiCo, based here in the UK. And I am leading the design team for brand Pepsi.
Cool. So, my name's Simon Platt. Formerly of ASOS and Next, I was with Nick. If any of you saw Nick earlier, Nick was my CEO. I was the sourcing director and director of ESG. Left about a year ago, and I've started up a business called Recom, which is around recovering products with brands, getting them back in, and then where do we go with them next? So trying to keep that circle going, if you like. So that's my background. But we're going to talk about Pepsi. So Hayley's got quite a lot to say, and it's brilliant. And she's got some things to show you as well around what they're up to. But I guess my first question, Hayley, would be, you know, Pepsi are now stepping into the fashion world. Interesting, I get it. But could you talk a little bit about why and how you're going to do that and what's important to you guys?
Sure. Yeah, you might be wondering, why is a big food and beverage company like PepsiCo here at an event like Source Fashion? And the reality is that we've got over 500 brands globally, and a continued push to really move our brands into a space where we're not just talking about the packet of crisps or the bottle of soda, but we're trying to connect with our consumers in different ways. And with that, we actually tend to create quite a lot of stuff. Just last year alone, with the launch of brand Pepsi, the redesign that you may see on shelves now, we produced 30,000 garments alone just in the UK for brand Pepsi in 3 months. So if you think about that at scale, it's actually quite a lot of stuff. And this all began about this time last year. I was briefed to kind of kick off this work stream. And as our team got into it, we started really interrogating the space. Like, what are we actually creating, and how has it been done in the past? And we saw quite a big opportunity to really shift the way our marketers kind of approach this. So going away from the logo slapping or working with producers that create things quickly and with short turnaround times to actually kind of considering what we're making and making it with purpose and in a better way.
And have you got examples, obviously, from starting from scratch and then going into where you are now, have you got examples of what you've done already?
Yeah, so as I said, it's been about a year that we've been learning as a team, and our first collection is meant to be the new core collection for brand Pepsi in Europe. And it includes 12 pieces. And part of this purpose was to try and centralize our production across our 42 different markets. So as I mentioned previously, each of those different markets would be going out and kind of briefing their own producers. We wouldn't know how the garments were being made. And we wanted to kind of centralize and control that a bit and really look at each piece that we were making. So we really focused in on the fabrics that we're using and wanted to try and make things that were durable and wearable, reducing our branding on each piece as well, so that people actually want to take it home, and it's not just another tote bag that you get in an event and shove in the cupboard. And so far what we've had is a really great response from all of our marketing partners, but also the influencers that are being given these things. My first example here is one of our favorites, this nice waterproof backpack. And just internally in our office, anyone that's gotten this bag, I see them wearing it to the office almost every single day. So that's already a really, really good sign, I think.
So, from listening to what you're saying there, it sounds like traceability, transparency throughout your whole value chain. And I call it a value chain because we need to move away from this just transactional supply mentality. This is a value chain. That sounds really important to you. And I know that when I was looking at, we were having a chat before this interview, it's kind of one of the reasons why I was happy to do this, was because your values align with things that I know are really important. And especially, and one of the guys earlier was asking, if you're going to start up a brand, how do you do that? How do you get off on that sustainable mark? So that's really great to hear. How How are you going to move that forward? How's that going to sort of run through for you now?
Sure. We've got quite a lot that we want to do, a lot in the pipeline now. So I think, firstly, we're still working on that core collection and continuing to progress and improve it. So any pieces, for example, that we produced in China, we're trying to move that production into the UK or into the EU and look at how we can improve the fabrics that we're using, or continue to kind of detail those products to be more durable and long-lasting. So that's one piece. And then for the fall and winter of this year, we're also introducing another 5 pieces to the core collection. And I'm proud to say that 4 of those 5 pieces are actually being produced in the UK. So we're working with a knitwear factory up in Manchester, and a cut and sew factory in Leicester, and really kind of focusing again on that kind of local quality and trying to make things that we have a close proximity to the actual creation of the garment. And then I think future thinking, we're not quite there yet, but we have some ideas around how you could actually reduce the creation of new things. So could we actually shift the mentality from, for each event, providing 200 hoodies for all of our influencers to actually having maybe a stand of vintage jackets that they could come in and pick from, and then custom little badges that they could iron on themselves. So, or creating a collection of higher-end garments with a local designer that then could become a rentable fashion collection for our influencers and be garments that could be reused year after year. So those are a couple of ideas that we have so far.
So if you think about lessons learned from a startup, there's obviously a lot of brands that are already in existence, and they do say that once you're out there, to try and then maneuver into being more sustainable, use the generic word, responsible. What lessons do you think you learned, and how have you applied that to what you're doing from a thinking point of view?
Sure. I think the first thing's quite obvious, but asking questions. I mean, traditionally, we're packaging and branding designers, not fashion designers, so we have quite a lot to learn and continue to do so. And so I think it's really just asking, who's actually making these pieces? What's the footprint of each piece and the life cycle? How is it being produced from start to end? Why are we making it in the first place is a good question sometimes. Is it fit for purpose? Do we need to make something new? And then, when's the time to do that as well? Are we giving ourselves enough lead times to do things with the right process? And I think that's the biggest one that's been a big learning, is we were trying to turn things around in such short periods of time that we really couldn't have done that in a proper way. So I think it's educating our partners that, to do things properly, you need to really invest a little bit more. Higher cost does mean higher quality, and higher quality does mean better brand resonance with our consumers. And you also can't give us 2 weeks to make something. We need 9 months like we do with packaging. So those were a few takeaways. And one more thing, I guess, is also not taking things for face value. And I have one example of that, which is that about a year and a half ago, so before we really dug into the space, we did a football kit, and it was made from 100% recycled plastic bottles. And it actually even won a sustainability award. Now after learning, I'm not so proud of that anymore, because we have learned that as you create garments out of recycled plastic, there's microfibers, and there's also a tendency to generate bottles to then generate fabric. And at the end of the day, bottles should be recycled into bottles, fabric into fabric. So I guess the learning was not to fall in the trap of greenwashing, which can easily happen if you don't know what you're doing.
I have to say, hearing things like that you're still new to this, you're at the very beginning or early part of your journey. And I personally am pleasantly surprised at how much learnings you've taken forward and applied to what you're doing, but also what you're going to do. So what have you got examples of collaborations, or what might be coming down the road? Because I'm sure people are dying to see. She's got a really cool goodie bag down here.
I do have a few bits with me. So one of my favorite pieces that we've made so far, and I'm kind of proud to show, is this first Pepsi jumper. So obviously it's very Pepsi branded, but this was to celebrate the launch of the brand. So it has to kind of shout Pepsi. But with this garment, the the actual yarn is 100% organic cotton. It was then woven into fabric in the UK. It was custom dyed to our Pantone blue for Pepsi, and created in a cut and sew factory in Leicester. So all created very local, with a much smaller footprint than usual, even down to the woven label on the bottom, which was not outsourced like we traditionally have done. So off the back of this piece, we're actually working with the designers who saved all of the offcuts from that first production of jumpers, and which I've got here. And we're trying to use these offcuts now into our next piece in our winter collection. So all of those offcuts would then go into sort of the detailing on our next piece. This is not a finished piece, by the way, but just a sample of how you could use the offcuts to then line the, the interior of the collar or have a detail on the sleeve. And then the even smaller scraps were then made into little Pepsi teddy bears and stuffed with the tiny shreds of fabric, which I really love. And I wish I had one here, but I gave it to a colleague having a baby. So, but I love that story, and I thought that's just a really nice example of something we were able to do locally, and really, really with a small footprint. So,
yeah. I think designing out the waste. We've been talking as well since we've met about even more opportunities to design out waste. So it's great that you're utilizing the pre-consumer materials, but imagine designing this sweatshirt or any other products where you don't have any pre-consumer waste because you've done it in a different way. And we were chatting about that. I know Hayley's made some great connections here at the show today, from a production and from a print and all sorts. So for me, it's kind of to that person that talked earlier about how do you start a new brand and ensure it's sustainable when everything would go against, we just don't need any more gear. It's been really good for me to see how, with my background, how you've started this, but where you're going with it and how you're sort of applying that to sort of your bigger journey. You've talked about transparency. I think it's really important that you mentioned that relationship and that planning. Slightly coming up from a curve point of view, what would you say, what have been your two biggest challenges in getting this brand either through Pepsi and out into the wider world, and then getting it to the point you've got it to today?
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest challenge actually really lies in bringing our partners on the journey with us. So as you can imagine, with any large brand, we have the ways of working that we've had for sometimes decades, and people in the business that are used to doing things a certain way. And I think for me, it's all about really sharing with them the knowledge that we've gained, and also explaining to them why they might need to pay a little bit more, or again, like I said, kind of give us a little bit longer to create things. And so that has been a tough one, and I think that'll be the ongoing sort of education piece that we have to keep doing. But that can be a big challenge, especially in a big company. Mm-hmm. I mean, the other one, like I mentioned, is just coming from a non-fashion background and then trying to kind of learn all of these things. Luckily, being at an event like Source has been fantastic, and I think the learning is just to keep connecting with people, keep asking questions, be a little bit fearless with that as well. I mean, it's intimidating to come as a brand like PepsiCo that clearly is not doing everything right yet, but to just be kind of honest and humble and be able to kind of ask questions to people that do know.
I know we talked when we spoke on the call a few days ago. I wondered what the pressures would be like on you as a brand going into clothing when, as you mentioned, the certain parts of the industry, the food industry, whether it be you or another well-known brand that sounds like Coca-Cola, yeah, that one, get a lot of pressure, and are under, rightly so, a lot of pressure to not be pumping out plastic and so on and so forth. How did that what kind of pressure has that given you in terms of then going out with a clothing brand?
Well, I think it's an interesting space to navigate, and I think it comes down to transparency and honesty, and I think kind of the ethos that while we might not be doing everything perfectly, we are trying, and being really clear that we are taking small steps. And I think every small step actually at scale is quite a big one. So, I mean, that's one way of approaching it, I guess.
And how do you feel about talking to your consumer about that? I know I felt very much so that we should bring the consumer along on the journey. There are various reasons why people aren't talking as much about things they're doing. It's not always because they're not doing something. It may be that they've just not got everything organized for them to be able to publicly declare that in the way that it needs to be declared.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important for your consumers to know about how you're developing this brand?
Absolutely, and that is something that we've been thinking about. I think just to go back to what we actually produce at scale, which is our soda, that's been a tricky one to kind of communicate to our consumer because that journey is such a big one, and it's been a tricky one to get an external facing message that is clear and that all of our stakeholders are happy for us to talk about. It's been hard to bring that to the table, but actually I think in the fashion space, it's a space that people don't necessarily expect to see Pepsi showing up. So I actually see a lot more of an opportunity to kind of start to sprinkle these smaller stories about what we're doing and kind of get that through the system in a different way. So, for example, the garment I mentioned using the off cups of the fabric, that's something that we're looking to potentially PR in the winter season. Again, still trying to navigate how we say that and why a brand like Pepsi would be saying this, but I think that's actually an easier story to kind of sell than talking about the bigger issues for our company. So,
cool. I think I'm looking around and trying to see if there's anyone my age in here, and there's not many. You're all a lot younger than me. But back in the 70s, I think when I was 7, I had a Pepsi T-shirt which had a slogan on it, and I don't know if anyone will remember that slogan. And I'm assuming that Hayley knows it off by heart. Does anyone remember the lip smacking first, quenching, cool, fizzing? What's the rest? I can't remember. Have you not learned it yet? No, that needs to be back on a T-shirt. It was my favorite T-shirt. Anyway, is there anything else you'd like to share? If not, we've got about 6-7 minutes where we can go out to the audience and take questions. Anything else you'd like to?
Well, I guess like exactly what you just said about remembering that shirt that you've got from the 70s. I think we've gone through a dip, and I think the entire industry has gone through a dip where we no longer are seeing garments that people keep in their closet for 30 years. And I'd love to bring that quality back. Like, I'd love for these jumpers to be in a thrift store 30, 40 years from now and still be intact. So I think, let's bring that back.
Cool, sounds good to me. So, out to you guys. Anybody got any questions? We got one down here on the left. Have we got the roving mic? Otherwise, he's going to have to look like he's kissing me while I lean into him a little bit, and it's probably... Here we go. Just down here.
So a lot of the talk has been around new brands that are coming into the market trying to be sustainable. And obviously you guys are an older brand, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of things that a startup would have to consider in terms of reintroducing the idea. What are some of the things that you guys are doing that maybe some other independent brands might want to be interested in to know?
So in terms of approaching it like a startup, you mean like learnings? I guess a lot of the things that I mentioned about asking questions, I mean, that's been our biggest thing. I can't sit here and pretend I know the answer. But I mean, showing up to events like this, straight away I've already met a few people, a few vendors around the sidelines that I've already learned about. What were you talking about? Instead of cutting where you've got offcuts, that you can cut to the actual...
printing on demand and printing to the actual pattern, so you're getting rid of the pre-consumer waste. It's like the evolution. I mean, 5-6 years ago, I was at an event in Stockholm with H&M that was showing a dress that was made out of plastic bottles. And at that time, plastic bottles recycled into clothing was a thing, but it's moved on. And like you said, fiber to fiber. So I think that's...
Yeah, I would say, going to that example where we made that football kit out of recycled plastic bottles and then 6 months later found out that that's actually really not sustainable. That was a little learning for us. And I think we just continue to push and evolve what we're doing and try not to lock into any one way of doing things and just keep evolving with it as we learn.
Hopefully you've got a shed load of information from today. He's asking good questions.
Hello. Is PepsiCo getting into fashion because soda is bad for health and it's trying to balance the good and the bad? Is that the reason why the shift is happening a little bit?
Perhaps.
Just curious.
No, it's a good question. If you think back to Pepsi from the 70s and 80s, a lot of people would still remember a lot of our commercials or partnerships with Britney Spears and Michael Jackson. And I think back in the day, we had a lot of brand relevance, and especially in Europe. As you can tell, I'm American, so I actually come from North Carolina where Pepsi was made. We have a lot more relevance there, but in a market where Pepsi is not necessarily historically loved and known, you just kind of have to find new ways to connect with consumers and resonate with them in different ways. But as a brand, we've always really invested in talent. So across the music industry, the football industry, or just designers that we would promote and partner with. That is something that the brand's always done, but I wouldn't say it's been really well known, especially in Europe and the UK. So that's really where we're trying to go with it, is kind of bring that back, actually.
Just remember, they're the guys that set fire to Michael Jackson's head. Accidentally, too much hairspray. Any more questions?
Yeah, just one here. So I wanted to ask what your main approach to sustainable fashion is. Is it mainly that garments are locally produced and you don't have to outsource a lot of the services, or do you have oversight of the production process? So let's say ensuring that things are produced in an energy efficiently way, or that people are paid fair wages, for example. And so the garment you showed is made of organic cotton. I don't think that would have been produced locally in the UK, unless you could correct me if I'm wrong. I'd assume it probably comes from India. So there is some sort of extent of production happening outside of the UK. And how does PepsiCo account for that?
Again, I think this is just the start of our journey. And with this first collection, I think already across the 12 pieces, there are a lot of places where we recognize, that wasn't done the best way possible. So as I mentioned, I think we're now reapproaching that first 12 pieces, and we're continuing to kind of shift the way we're creating it. So I wouldn't say our process is perfect yet, but we are trying to actually really get to understand each step of the process from start to finish. Again, I mean, honestly, it's just to kind of learn as we go and correct as we go, and going from a mentality where we were not involved at all from a design standpoint and things were just being pushed out into market and we had no visibility, to then now trying to gain that visibility. I think that's where we're at currently. But again, just correcting as we go.
Hi, Hayley. So first personal thing, I think it's so admirable what you're doing as an individual to join this company, help them fix the product because they're pumping it out and kind of make it sustainable. I think it's incredible, and more designers should consider joining this type of companies to help them. But if I look at the company overall, I feel a bit conflicting that we are here talking about PepsiCo in general. I mean, 30,000 products just for one launch sounds insane. It's not fashion, it's not clothes that anyone needs, so basically it is becoming just garbage. I don't know, I know you're mentioning that you're supporting like athletes and designers. I can't think of any designers, at least within the UK, that ever got supported by Pepsi in any possible way. Not even like sharing any, let's not say like financially supporting, but knowledge or anything like that. So yeah, I feel kind of almost wrong why Pepsi is going into this field. And
Totally. No, that's a very fair point to make. And I think, as I mentioned, we have a little bit more history with that in our other markets. So in the US, for example, or in our Latin American markets, I know they did a big music program partnering with musicians who weren't as famous with some of our bigger celebrity kind of musicians to kind of empower them. And what we've kind of been doing as a team here is looking at what other markets have done that has actually been really impactful for kind of smaller businesses or designers or musicians, and we're trying to replicate that here. As I mentioned, this is the very start of our kind of journey with this. So our design team's been in the UK for about 2 years now working on Pepsi, and so I think that's only what's going to come from this. But those are things that we're looking to continue to do here. So yeah, you wouldn't have seen it necessarily yet, but that's what we're hoping to kind of change.
I think we're out of time. So just to wrap up, I'd like to say, and I've had quite a few long conversations with Hayley that, and again, 40 years odd in the industry and in the background of sourcing and what's now being termed ESG, I have to say, for someone or for a brand that's coming into the industry and for having a person like Hayley and a small team that she's got and how she's thinking and where she's going, on your behalf, I feel comfortable that this is going to go in the right direction. And I know I'm going to stay close and try and help wherever I can. So I just want to say thank you.
No,
well
I appreciate it.
And thanks for joining us here today. Hayley.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for listening to us.